Hello and welcome to the Saturday Roundup with me, Maynard. Before we start, I sincerely apologize for not being with you guys last week. I lost my aunt on the Thursday before, a very quiet pillar in our family. For those that know, thank you for the kind messages, and I promise to make it up to you with today's Roundup. Here's what we're going to be talking about today. Why a Zimbabwean journalist's arrest was raised in the British House of Lords and how the First Lady is now in the spotlight. And what about the wild escape story of a man who broke out of court, pulled a toy gun heist and just got 22 years in prison for his first crime? What a way to start. And also how 3 journalists have gone from being news writers to newsmakers and for all the wrong reasons. And why the University of Zimbabwe lecturers are on strike again, fighting for dignity and fighting for a living wage. We will talk about the power outage that embarrassed organizers at the Zimbabwe International Trade Fair just before Vice President Constantino Chiwenga's big moment. Then we shift to the Vatican, where African Catholics are hoping for something that's never happened in modern history before: a black pope. Back home, traffic accidents over Easter and Independence holidays. We break down the stats, and finally, police claim opposition leaders are plotting violent protests. And they've named them. They've named the names of the supposed people. Let's get into it. This week, Zimbabwe's human rights record made its way into the British House of Lords, and it wasn't for good reasons. Lord Johnny Oates raised the case of colleague and journalist Blessed Mhlanga, who is currently imprisoned in Zimbabwe for, we've spoken about this a lot, you know about it by now, for doing journalism. Mhlanga's crime is supposedly interviewing war veteran Blessed Geza, who dared to criticize President Emmerson Mnangagwa's alleged bid to cling to power. Now, here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. Oates didn't just stop at condemning the arrest of journalist Blessed Mhlanga. He suggested that First Lady Auxilia Mnangagwa, who is due to visit the UK in June, should face tough questions directly from British MPs. And this wasn't just like venting sessions like we've seen before from British politicians, especially those in the Labour government or affiliated with the Labour Party. Oates explicitly say that the UK should maintain its stance: no more relations with a regime that jails journalists and crushes dissent. The UK has already rejected Zimbabwe's return to the Commonwealth, and the implication now is clear: reform or remain a pariah state. But here's the thought: when democratic countries call out abuses, are they doing enough beyond just talk, or are these statements increasingly becoming symbolic rather than strategic? And how can a regime that jails journalists while smiling for Commonwealth invitations be taken seriously? It's all a bit isn't it? But Auxilia is coming, and we'll see what happens there. Will there be protests, eggs? Who knows? We've seen them do it to Farage. Now let's switch gears to a story that feels like it was ripped straight from a heist film, but without the happy ending that you get in movies. Look, Zinger, who recently pulled off a daring jailbreak at Harare Magistrates Court, he's been sentenced to 22 years behind bars. His saga is, look, it's incredible, but it starts like this. It starts with a prison break that is aided by relatives and a rogue prison officer. And then it escalates into an armed robbery. Luke hijacked a car at gunpoint, led police on a wild goose chase, and then vanished for a while. He was eventually caught, hauled to court, and Zinyengere's defense was that the gun was a toy. Nice try. The court found otherwise and handed him 10 years for the escape and 12 for the robbery. Magistrate Ledwin Rodzi didn't miss her words. She called it a movie-style crime that traumatized the public. And here's the kicker. She said to him, "You started at the deep end." Mind you, this is his first conviction. But let's sit with that thought for a second. A first-time offender managed to pull off such a well-choreographed plan. Either he's got the worst instincts or he's got some serious training. And what does this say about the vulnerabilities in our correctional system, where smuggling a real firearm into a cell is possible with the right connections? That sounds scary. This wasn't just a jailbreak, it was a group project. A prison officer, 2 relatives, and even a prosecutor are now all under investigation. So here's my question. In a system this leaky, how many other Zingereres are just waiting for the right moment to pounce? Think about that. Look, now journalism is a tough job, but this next story is a lesson in what not to do with press freedom. 3 journalists, colleagues, Desire Chuma, Simbarashi Stole, and Gideon Madzikatidze, I think, if I recall, my memory is not so good, but I think it's Gideon Madzikatidze. They've been charged with extortion after allegedly demanding bribes to kill a story. Yeah, you heard that right. So the allegation goes this way, right? It's that Chuma first contacted a senior official at the Zimbabwe Copyright Center about a supposed fraud investigation. But instead of publishing the expose, he offered a pay-to-make-it-go-away deal. He was given $100, but that wasn't enough for him. He didn't like that too much. So his 2 colleagues showed up for a second round of pressure plus lunch. Eventually, they were caught in a sting, accepting the trap money. The story reads like a plot of a newsroom noir film, you know, except this one doesn't end with Pulitzers, but it ends with court dates and bail conditions. Now, let's be clear. That's not journalism. This isn't journalism. This is racketeering wrapped in a press pass. And here's a hard truth. Stories like these, they damage the credibility of every journalist, especially in a country where the press already works under pressure and in extremely difficult conditions. You know, it leads people to ask questions. What happens when watchdogs become the wolves? And what systems are in place to hold the media accountable without enabling state overreach or censorship? Because no doubt this incident will be used to show how, you know, Zimbabwean journalists are brown envelope journalists. Now, onto the nation's classrooms, or rather empty classrooms. University of Zimbabwe lecturers have declared a fresh strike over poor pay just days after police broke up a previous protest and arrested 3 union leaders. A high court in Zimbabwe has now ruled that these lecturers, they can demonstrate peacefully, but the real issue here isn't the right to protest. We already go through that every other day. It's why they're protesting in the first place. Here's the ugly math for you. Before October 2018, a junior lecturer probably earned about $2,500 a month. That's a sound amount of money, not world standard, but it's decent. Today, that same lecturer, his earnings have been slashed by about 87%. So the take home is just over $200. In a country with runaway inflation, that's barely enough to cover groceries, never mind housing, school fees, healthcare, fuel, and all those other things that a lecturer needs. Professor Jonathan Moyo, a man not known for mincing his words, called this a national crisis. He says the government's failure to reverse this collapse, it's an abuse of duty. Make no mistake, this is an abuse of duty. And to be fair, he's not wrong. He's not wrong, is he? He paints a damning picture. Lavish perks for university managers, silence from higher education ministry officials and the ministry itself, and more than 27 unanswered letters from the lecturers' union. Moyo's argument that if we can't pay academics to generate intellectual property, we're not just hurting education, we're hurting national development. Because let's face it, politicians won't solve poverty. They won't solve climate change. They can't even solve fuel shortages or electricity problems. So it's the thinkers, the researchers and the scientists, and maybe inventors to some degree. And where do all of these people come from? Yeah, let me guess. Not from the store. Yeah, you guessed it right. They come from universities. So I ask, how does a country move forward when it sidelines the very people that, they're meant to light the way for the country? And more provocatively is the neglect of academics, a sign that the state fears thinkers more than it respects them. Because a well-meaning state, think China, think maybe Malaysia or Vietnam, all these newly industrialized nations, they respect academics. Now, organizers of the Zimbabwe International Trade Fair were left red-faced on Wednesday when a power cut delayed Vice President Constantino Dominic Gouveia Chiwenga's speech at the Zimbabwe International Business Conference. Chiwenga had just been invited to the podium by Trade Minister Mangaliso Ndlovu when the lights went out. For 5 awkward minutes, the room was dark, power flickered back briefly, only to go off again. Eventually, a backup generator kicked in, Ndlovu apologized, and ZITF chairman Busisa Moyo blamed it on a fault and an overloaded power line. He said both the main line and the backup generator had failed simultaneously. He added that they're working to solarize exhibition halls as part of a smart city upgrade. Yeah, smart city. Okay. Anyway, Chiwenga made no mention of the outage in his speech, but Zimbabweans are used to such scenes. Power cuts lasting up to 8 hours, 12, 16, 18 sometimes, remain pretty much commonplace in the country. So maybe this time the rulers got a taste of the kind of lives that we live. They never get to experience this, so maybe good on Zesa. Following the death of Pope Francis, many African Catholics are hopeful that the next leader of the church could be from the African continent. The Catholic Church is growing fastest in Africa. Some say it's time for the papacy to reflect that. Cardinal Peter Turkson from Ghana, Cardinal Fridolin Ambongo of Congo, and Ivory Coast's Cardinal Ignace Bezi Dogbo. Jikes, I'm butchering those names, but at least I remembered them. They're among the African names that are being mentioned, but Vatican insiders told Reuters that they remain doubtful. Critics say these cardinals haven't had the kind of global media scrutiny that Western contenders receive, and if they got that scrutiny, it's all gonna fall apart. It's probably gonna go the Pius Ngcuwe way. And while an African pope could be seen as continuing Francis' pro-developing world legacy, most African cardinals are more conservative, especially on issues like same-sex marriage or blessings for same-sex marriage. Still, many people believe that having a black pope, it would reframe how Africa is seen globally and inspire the faithful across the continent. But is that even a thing? Barack Obama, remember him? A man with Kenyan roots, he didn't change how the world perceives Africans, even as he was the most powerful man in the world. So I'd say don't hold your breath. It would be a good thing, but it will most likely be meh. This year's Easter and Independence holidays saw more road traffic accidents than the ones last year. According to the police, 384 crashes were recorded, up from 286 in 2024. However, fatalities dropped slightly, 21 fatal crashes compared to 26 last year. The number of people injured in those crashes rose to like 178. One of the deadliest incidents from that period happened on April 21 when a Toyota Hiace overturned along the Harare Blawayo Road, killing 4 people and injuring 14. There were also 3 fatal hit and runs, including a pedestrian killed by a motorcyclist in Mutoko, and 2 separate cases near Harare. Police, they urged drivers to stop, help, and report accidents, a legal obligation that, from the most recent stats, it seems most people are choosing to ignore. And now, fancy some fear? The Zimbabwe Republic Police says it has identified a plot by opposition figures to unleash violent protests. The accused include Jacob Ngarivume and Amos Chibaya, both long-time government critics. Police spokesperson Paul Nyati, he says the alleged plot involves property damage and burning tires, and he warned that law enforcement is on high alert and they'll act without fear or favor. Ngarivume leads Transform Zimbabwe, and Chibaya is a former CCC MP. If I recall correctly, he was recalled by Chabangu, and he's just been discharged for a case not too different from this one, but I think it was for some gathering of some sort. Nyati, the police spokesperson, he hasn't explained how these guys are linked to the protests, but he says investigations are ongoing. And this comes as frustration builds over corruption allegations against President Mnangagwa's cronies and reports that he may seek to extend his term beyond 2028. Whew. That's all for this week's Saturday Roundup. Power cuts, purple politics, deadly roads, and protest plots in Zimbabwe. You know, Zimbabwe always keeps the news cycle busy, from jail cells to lecture halls, from parliament to press pits. We've seen how Zimbabwe's institutions are tested, stretched, and sometimes subverted. You know, what stays with me is this: whether you are a journalist, a lecturer, or even a prisoner, there's a pattern to all of this though. Those who challenge the system, who ask hard questions, or who demand fair treatment often find themselves in its crosshairs. But here is the thing, and I hope they're listening. Democracies are strengthened not by silencing dissent. No, that's the wrong way to go about it. They are strengthened by listening to it. Let's talk again next Saturday, same time, same place. Take care, stay sharp, and keep questioning everything. I'm Maynard, and cheers.